By the dawn of the 1960s, the Cold War had turned the skies into a political proving ground. After the Soviet Sputnik launch on October 4, 1957, and Yuri Gagarin's orbital flight on April 12, 1961, President John F. Kennedy seized the moment with a clear challenge to Congress on May 25, 1961. Land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade was out. That audacious pledge transformed national security competition into a public spectacle, with technology and prestige on the line against the USSR. NASA's Apollo program, created to meet that pledge, evolved into a layered engineering campaign centered on the colossal Saturn V rocket, the three-stage behemoth developed at Marshall Space Flight Center. By July 1969, the program had survived the crucible of the Apollo 1 fire on January 27, 1967, and milestone flights including Apollo 8 in lunar orbit in December 1968, and was now targeting a lunar landing. At Kennedy Space Center, LC-39A buzzed with final checks as the crew commander Neil A. Armstrong, lunar module pilot Edwin Buzz Aldrin Jr., and command module pilot Michael Collins ran simulations, donned suits, and reviewed checklists ahead of the scheduled July 16, 1969 liftoff, every move sharpened by geopolitical stakes and public expectation. On July 16, 1969, at Launch Complex 39A, the Saturn V roared to life and turned public spectacle into a thunderous roar, an engine of national will. Cameras and dignitaries watched as the first stage SIC burn built raw speed and altitude, then separated cleanly and handed the job to the S2 second stage and its cluster of J2 engines. Two more clean separations followed as the S4B third stage pushed Columbia and Eagle into an initial Earth parking orbit. The crowd's awe gave way to a sterile, coppery focus in mission control at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston. Flight controllers ran a tight choreography of telemetry streams, guidance updates, and engine performance numbers, everything reduced to crisp readouts and curt radio calls that turned the day from pageantry to precision. Later that same day, ground teams reignited the S4B for translunar injection, a delicate burn that flung the combined spacecraft toward the moon and set the clock for a tense week of orbital maneuvers. As cabin pressure stabilized and the sun slid across the portholes, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins settled into the translunar cruise routine. Systems checks, navigation star sightings, checklist reads, and compact meals. Each small task a necessary stroke on a monumental canvas. Subscribe. Maybe it would have steadied the Eagle. Michael Collins, alone in Columbia, carried a distinct burden. He piloted the command module, managed life support and rendezvous systems, and remained ready to fly solo while the lunar module descended. His solitary cockpit foreshadowed the tension to come when Eagle would undock and leave him circling above. The public spectacle receded, and the focus turned inward as crisp expertise took over, driving the mission toward the decisive lunar approach still to come. July's schedule now raced forward toward destiny. On July 19, 1969, Apollo 11 executed lunar orbit insertion. The service module fired a precise burn that put Columbia and Eagle into a bronze-hued 60 nautical mile circular orbit above the Sea of Tranquility. The crew, Neil A. Armstrong, Edwin Buzz Aldrin Jr., and Michael Collins, ran checklists and swept imaging while Mission Control in Houston tightened its telemetry focus. In the hours that followed, the choreography shifted from orbit to separation. On July 20th, the two modules power tested, hatches cycled, and Armstrong and Aldrin entered the lunar module Eagle to configure descent systems, while Collins remained alone in Columbia, vigilantly monitoring rendezvous computers and life support. Every switch and circuit breaker had to be confirmed. Every navigation star sighting and Doppler fix refined the landing ellipse. As Eagle undocked and pitched for powered descent, the tension condensed into crisp tasks: engine ignition sequencing, throttle profiles, radar locking on lunar surface elevation maps, and continuous cross-checks with Mission Control. Then alarms erupted. The lunar guidance computer displayed 1201 and 1202 program alarms, executive overflows that signaled a risk of aborting the automated landing. In Houston, the guidance officer, Steve Bales, and flight director Gene Kranz ran through fault trees in seconds and advised continue after determining the autopilot could still manage the critical functions. Meanwhile, visual reconnaissance by Armstrong revealed an unexpected boulder-strewn plain and a widening crater dangerously close to the planned touchdown. He took semi-manual control, skimming the surface, shifting the landing point by hundreds of meters, and burning precious descent fuel until gauges showed only about 25 seconds remaining. Mission control recalibrated timelines, radio traffic sharpened, and the world waited as crew and ground improvised under a gilded deadline, the stakes funneling toward a single decisive moment. On July 20th, 1969, Armstrong eased the Eagle down over the Sea of Tranquility while Mission Control in Houston listened. The 1201 and 1202 alarms had been diagnosed, but the immediate danger was a boulder-strewn plain that made the planned landing point unusable. Trained for this moment, Armstrong switched to semi-manual control and scanned for a viable patch of regolith while Aldrin called ranges and monitored engine performance. Collins orbited alone in Columbia. Ground guidance teams in Houston, led by Flight Director Gene Kranz and Guidance Officer Steve Bales, with Capcom Charles Duke relaying decisions, timed each maneuver with clipped calls and crisp calculations. The lunar module's descent engine throbbed and the propellant gauges whispered a dire countdown. Remaining fuel had dwindled to roughly 25 seconds of hover at touchdown throttle. Television carried the exchanges to an estimated 600 million viewers worldwide. Each second narrowed into a single luminous decision window: continue the landing or abort and sacrifice the mission's defining objective. Armstrong tracked outcrops and a widening crater, floated Eagle laterally, and burned precious propellant for 100 and then several hundred meters of repositioning. Radio traffic tightened to essentials: altitude, rate, fuel, while Houston cross-checked radar returns and surface imagery against navigation solutions. The crew's training condensed into instant arithmetic: descent rate versus propellant mass, landing leg load versus slope, rendezvous contingency versus surviving another lunar revolution. The stakes were stark. A safe touchdown would vindicate President Kennedy's pledge. An abort or crash would shatter American prestige. With fuel dwindling and the Sea of Tranquility yawning below, Armstrong steered toward the only plausible clearing, every motion a wager on history. Eagle's skids touched the lunar surface at 8:20:17:40 UTC on July 20th, 1969, landing in the Sea of Tranquility after Armstrong's semi-manual piloting. Armstrong radioed plainly, "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." In Mission Control, Flight Director Gene Kranz said, "You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again," while Capcom Charles Duke relayed guidance. Fuel margins had been minimal. The crew breathed a sigh of relief but stayed focused. About 6 hours later, at 2:56:15 UTC on July 21st, 1969, Neil A. Armstrong descended the ladder and stepped onto lunar dust, broadcasting the iconic line, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Buzz Aldrin joined him and called the landscape magnificent desolation, while Michael Collins orbited alone in Columbia. Television carried the moment to an estimated 600 million viewers. Applause, tears, and silence followed worldwide. In the minutes that followed, they collected samples, deployed a plaque and the American flag, and turned a perilous gamble into an epical human and geopolitical triumph that set off a wider wave of scientific, cultural, and political impact. After splashdown on July 24, 1969, the crew were recovered by the USS Hornet and placed in the Mobile quarantine facility. They were then flown to Houston for intensive debriefings at the Manned Spacecraft Center and met with President Richard Nixon. Apollo 11 returned 47.5 pounds, 21.6 kilograms, of lunar rocks and regolith, and left the passive seismic experiment, a laser-ranging retroreflector, and the solar wind composition experiment on the Sea of Tranquility, all of which produced immediate scientific data and decades of follow-on study. The mission also translated into political capital by fulfilling John F. Kennedy's pledge, shifting Cold War prestige and accelerating technological spin-offs in microelectronics, materials, navigation, and telecommunications. It reshaped the public imagination. Classrooms, industry, and policymakers embraced bolder goals, leading to Skylab, the space shuttle era, and, decades later, the Artemis vision. That gilded triumph left a simple, enduring question: what will we dare to do next?